Chapter 13. Wyatt stood in front of the 57 personnel he had vouched for, all of them sitting in a small circle away from any panels and controls. 6 Royal Marines silently worked in conjunction with Cynthia across the bridge's terminal as they tried to do something with the ship, but an hour later they had not moved from their positions. He wasn't a particularly impatient man. He was a pilot, and he had been trained to be both patient and act rapidly depending on the situation, but the wait was killing him. He turned to the red-haired lieutenant commander, the highest-ranked officer among them, and spoke. "Are all of you nobles?" The lieutenant commander was surprised by the sudden question, but nodded. "Lord Samuel didn't trust commoner operators with the command of his ship." "Makes sense," Wyatt replied, glancing at Cynthia. She didn't stop working to admonish him, so he continued. "What is this ship?" "We don't know," the man replied. "This ship, the Samuel's Glory, was delivered to this station 6 months ago along with 3 additional ships, similar to the frigate stationed on the other dock." "That thing is a frigate?" Wyatt asked, surprised. "I thought that given their size, they would be heavy gunships." "You fought them?" the lieutenant commander asked, confused and surprised. "You're not a Royal Marine?" "I'm a pilot," Wyatt replied dismissively. "And yes, I fought against those ships when we arrived in the system. Why didn't you?" The man tensed and shared quick glances with his comrades before replying. "Then, you really aren't a noble? You're just a commoner?" Wyatt frowned behind his visor, ashamed that a mere commoner saved your lives, blue bloods. "No," he replied sincerely. "What is your name?" "Wyatt," the pilot answered. "Yours?" "Lieutenant Commander Galt Tyrone," Galt answered, dipping his head. "I thank you for saving the lives of my comrades and I." "And you'll live so long as you don't do anything stupid," Wyatt remarked. "Now answer my question. Why didn't this ship participate during the battle?" "We were resupplying when your fleet arrived. We didn't have time to finish," Galt said, pausing for a moment to look at Cynthia and shudder. "Lord Samuel planned on striking at your weakest ships before you arrived. We were scheduled to leave in 2 hours. A lucky strike, then. Having you perform hit-and-run attacks would have been bothersome to deal with," Wyatt breathed out, grateful that they had taken down the ship before it could cause any trouble. After a pregnant silence that lasted for a minute, he asked, "You lot don't look terribly bothered that your commanding officer is dead." "Lord Samuel was a good captain, dutiful, loyal, and honored the rules of combat and etiquette. But he was also arrogant and punished anyone who didn't obey his strict orders. He won't be deeply missed." "Look who's talking," Wyatt thought with mild disdain, but then relaxed. Cynthia had interrogated them, mainly focusing on how the ship operated, and they confessed to each of her questions with minute detail. It was possible that they were lying, but so far their claims that they did have enough time to sabotage anything, place explosives, or purge their systems rang true. But alas, they only knew the surface level of how the ship's systems worked. Only Samuel Caiston had a deeper understanding of the ship, making his seemingly honor-bound request for a duel nothing more than a ruse. He knew he had no chance against a Royal Marine. He was planning to die from the start and take his secrets to the grave. He never cared about their lives. "I think I can believe them when they say that they won't miss him," Wyatt reasoned, looking back at Cynthia for a few seconds. At least she wasn't mad about me killing the damn Caiston, and that worried him immensely. "Wyatt, may I ask, why did you vouch for us?" Galt asked, and all eyes shifted to the pilot. "I don't like killing innocents," he replied, eyeing them carefully. "You were unarmed, surrendered, and your commanding officer pretty much put your lives on the line. Besides that, my reasons for keeping you alive were valid. You were fortunate that this ship is unlike anything we've seen before, and taking anything for granted would be foolish. Regardless, I thank you on behalf of all of us that you saved our lives if only for the time being. Maybe I shall see my daughter again," he said, and almost every other captured noble shared his same hopeful expression. "Why did you betray the prince?" Wyatt asked after a few seconds of silence. "You're nobles. You could have said something against the Caistons. Many noble houses have declared neutrality in this conflict. Why not you?" Galt sighed deeply. "It is not as simple as that. Being a noble is not as straightforward as many commoners may believe. You seem smart enough to realize this, Wyatt. Otherwise, I doubt you'd be here right now. He extended an arm to the rest of his fellows. Most of us here are fourth or even fifth offsprings, belong to branch bloodline houses, or have little influence within our houses. We are expendable. More than that, all of our houses are just minor and lesser, subservient to House Caiston or to one of their primary banner houses. As such, we don't have the luxury to disobey a call to arms. Wyatt paused and looked at them firmly, searching for any indication of deceit, but found none. He wasn't ignorant to the struggles and roles nobles and their houses played, but he was ignorant to whatever internal feuds, hereditary systems, and whatever ties bound them to serve their betters in turn. He chuckled ruefully. And this bastard thinks that a commoner has any choice whatsoever compared to his? If this succession dispute devolves into a civil war, all bets and laws will be off. And who do you think will die in droves just so that you nobles can retain your power? Perhaps I shouldn't have interjected, he thought with disdain, already regretting his choice. His ire was momentary, however, and as a second gave way to another, he regretted thinking that. His fear was true, of course. Outside the military branches, most commoners had even less power to oppose their noble rulers. But nobles were, at the end of the day, people, no matter how much he wished them not to be. They had families waiting for them. They were fathers, mothers, siblings, children. Killing innocents in cold blood was not something he enjoyed. Our situations aren't dissimilar, but you can still choose. What choice does a commoner have but to obey? If we don't, we get lashed, sent to the gutter, beaten up, exhorted for what little we have, or simply killed. Wyatt glared at them, his voice still calm as a controlled rage filled his chest, barely managing to contain it and keep a neutral tone. Don't come to me crying about how unfair your situation is, because as bad as you have it, many more have it worse, Galt Tirome. All of them under your status. Maybe so, Wyatt, but as you are under the command of nobles, we are under the command of those greater than ourselves, Galt retorted, eyes narrowing. I am no fool. The Caistons are strong enough to have refused the Draymore call to arms, but they happily joined their masters. How long has this coup been brewing? I know not, but do not accuse us of betrayal. We are loyal to the principality first, our duties and houses second, and ourselves third. Wyatt felt his anger dissolve after hearing Galt's words, and how close they mirrored his own line of thinking. Instead, he scoffed. I got involved in this conflict by chance. I am fighting for the prince. My loyalty lies within the principality. You chose to obey traitors. That's the difference. And now everyone else on this station is likely dead. If you want to live, I suggest you tell me anything and everything you might be concealing from us. Dropping to a knee to see Galt and the other prisoners at eye level, he continued. Unless your honor and loyalty towards a house that dragged you into this position is more important than your lives and those waiting for you back home. Your mental games won't work on any of us, commoner scum, a woman said abruptly. You may be wearing a lieutenant insignia, but you know nothing of true honor and duty. Even if we knew anything else, we wouldn't tell you, she finalized with a glare that showed nothing but contempt. You're nothing more than an ignorant, uneducated wretch who knows nothing more than to wait to be fed by your overbloated master. I know I am better than a filthy traitor, Wyatt said, raising his rifle and aiming it at the noblewoman. The prisoners flinched, and Galt moved in front of him, protecting the woman. Please, Wyatt, we truly do not know anything more. I swear upon my honor and that of House Timor that I speak the truth. The only one that knew anything more intricate than the basic functions of the ship and the operation of its systems was Lord Samuel Caiston, Galt pleaded. Wyatt stared into the eyes of the red-haired man for several seconds and sighed. Lowering his weapon, he stepped forth and shoved him out of the way. The rest of the nobles froze, and Galt stared at him with impotence. Around the pilot, unnoticed by him, the Royal Marines and Cynthia had slowed down, and their attention was split between their work and seeing what the pilot and the prisoners would do next. Wyatt grabbed the woman by the scruff of her uniform, and before she could protest against it, he punched her with all his strength, knocking out a few teeth, busting her lower lip, and causing a glob of fresh blood to spill across her uniform and some of her companions. He let go of her a moment later, and she fell to the floor unconscious but alive. Anyone else have something to say? He asked coldly. The prisoners remained silent for several moments, until a weak but resolute voice broke the uncomfortable silence. The encryption key is within Lord Samuel's possessions in his chambers. The code to enter without triggering the explosive trap is safeguarded here, Galt replied, reaching into his uniform to pull a data chit out. Presenting it to Wyatt, the noble looked at him with a grateful expression. You saved us yet again. Let this be my show of gratitude, and allow me to carry the burden and shame of betrayal to my lord's last wishes. Wyatt blinked in confusion. He stared into Galt's eyes yet again, and found a broken will behind them, but also genuine gratitude. Wordlessly, he took the chit and slowly made his way to Cynthia. When he stood next to her, he noticed her fingers working on a panel while wires protruding from her armor connected with the console she was fiddling with. It seems your assumption was correct, Wyatt, Cynthia said through a private channel. Wyatt looked at the data chit before replying. Fortunately for me, yeah. What was that even about? I knocked out that annoying harpy and Galt thanked me for it. I only wanted the satisfaction of shutting her up myself without killing her, he chuckled. It's the first time I punched a noble, too. I won't get in trouble because she's a traitor, right? Cynthia paused for a moment before replying. It can be overlooked. You are rather unorthodox, yet sensible at the same time. Paradoxical, she said, much to Wyatt's confusion. Nevertheless, if what Galt said is true, then we will be able to break through the encryption easily now. Wait, that's what you've been trying to do? You've been trying to hack into this ship's systems? Wyatt asked, astonished. The Royal Marines had broken through the station's cyber defenses within moments of their arrival, yet more than an hour had passed since the capture of the vessel, and they were incapable of taking full command of it yet. That confirms it, doesn't it? His question was rhetorical as he clenched his teeth tightly. If you're referring to the origins of these black ships, then yes, this confirms it. This ship, along with the damaged one and its sister ships, the cruiser and the one that pursued the royal yacht, were not made within the Principality. Duke Cornelius Draymore of Camrim acquired them from outside the Astorian Principality, Cynthia replied, frowning. Her fingers stopped working and the wires detached themselves from the panel, returning to the confines of her armor. Come with me, Wyatt. We were able to get basic information about the ship, including a layout map. We shall go to the captain's quarters and extract the encryption key. I obey, Wyatt replied, nodding and presenting the chit to Cynthia, who took it and stored it safely within a compartment of her armor. When they were outside the bridge and making their way to their new destination, he found his voice again. Are you going to kill them? Unless it was all a ploy on your part to make them give you information you suspected they withheld, then no, they are your prisoners, Wyatt, Cynthia replied. My prisoners? Hardly. They are at your mercy, not mine, he said back. Have you forgotten, Wyatt? Cynthia said with a touch of amusement in her voice. I said that I would protect you as if you were my princess herself. That includes listening and considering your requests, such as taking them as prisoners. And their actions are my responsibility, Wyatt said, feeling a headache forming. That's just fantastic. They're Cynthia's prisoners, but I am the one to decide their fate until Clara says otherwise. This could not possibly get any more bothersome. Their lives are of no consequence to me. The traitors that put the life of my princess and that of the prince in danger deserve no consideration. Traitors, all of them. However, circumstances are to be taken into account. Their cooperation after your intervention shall grant them leniency if my princess deems it so, Cynthia replied. Perhaps she will show them leniency. Perhaps not, said Wyatt. Cynthia turned her head slightly to Wyatt. You do not seem surprised by that. Wyatt bit his lower lip for a moment as he formulated a leveled answer. Clara is unlike any noble I've met before, but she's royalty. She needs to do what needs to be done during these troubling times. I do not believe she could ever be cruel, but that doesn't mean she'll be kind or forgiving either. Such is the burden of royalty, Cynthia agreed. What would you do with them if you were in her position? Wyatt shrugged. Send them to prison and put them under trial. His eyes narrowed. Galt had a point. Most of them were dragged due to laws, codes of honor, and bonds of servitude that tied their houses to House Caiston. They had little choice in the matter. Who among them are true traitors and who are only following orders? He replied with as much stoicism as he could manage. Would you treat them differently if they were commoners, Wyatt? Cynthia asked in a softer tone. He shook his head. I don't know. Maybe? Just because I'm a commoner doesn't mean I see every other commoner as faultless. I'm not blind nor ignorant. His eyes narrowed. I've seen what commoners can do, even those with wealth and power. They're not my people. Then who is? Whose side are you on? She pressed. My loyalty is to the principality, to the prince, to those that I can respect, be they nobles or commoners, it doesn't matter. I care for my parents and brothers, for those I knew growing up in Volantis, but everyone else right now is either an enemy or an ally. And I will do what I must, just like you have to, just like Clara has to, Wyatt replied, feeling a weight on his shoulders being lifted. Cynthia didn't reply as they walked down the pristine hallways that contrasted against the near pitch-black exterior of the ship. Everything inside was clean and well illuminated, with whites, grays, dull greens, yellows, and blues scattered all over the place to mark stations, caches, or directions. As Wyatt continued to admire the ship in silence, from the architectural standpoint, it was obvious that whoever constructed it was beyond the capabilities of the principality. The textures looked different. The angles were refined but strong. Principality ships were one of two, blocky, ugly, dull, and functional, or highly aesthetic and impractical for anything else but being leisure crafts. Ships like the Exalted Glory or the Royal Yacht were the exception to that rule, and they were rare. This ship is both beautiful and well-made. I wonder who made it and how Duke Draymore got his hands on them. I don't even want to imagine how much they cost, Wyatt thought moments before arriving at their destination. Stop! Cynthia commanded, stopping right in front of a sealed door. I'm detecting a series of explosive traps, she said, and took the chit out. She presented to the identification panel next to the door, and it beeped. A moment later, the door opened. Stay here, Wyatt. I'll retrieve the encryption key, she said, and entered the room. Wyatt obeyed and waited. He expected to hear things shattering or being ruffled about, but all he heard were the steps she was taking and things being moved aside. Finally, he heard a loud click, followed by something heavy opening. A few moments later, Cynthia walked out of the room with a small black box in her right hand. Is that the encryption key? He asked, never before having seen one in person. It is. From what I'm reading, it is no wonder why we couldn't break through the ship's encryption algorithm. The sequence keeps shifting, rearranging itself in random patterns every time it is tampered with. It makes it not only near impossible to predict, but also time-consuming, forcing us to start from the beginning, trying to search for the correct algorithmic pathway, she said with mild frustration. Assuming that I understand what you're talking about, does that mean it is difficult? He asked. Cyber warfare and security were not his forte. Cynthia nodded. Incredibly so. The encryption sequence is long, and with every failure it rearranges itself to a new sequence. It is vexing, to say the least. A dozen dedicated hacking AIs working together non-stop would be able to break such encryption within a week, I think. She raised the box slightly. With this, that won't be a problem anymore. What about the other ship? He asked, as the two resumed their walk back to the bridge. I already ordered the other Royal Marines to search for a similar chit on the officers' bodies. They found one and are on their way, she answered. Uriel Hoax will be happy to have his station then. Do you think Clara will be pleased with your victory? He asked. Our victory, Cynthia corrected. I believe she will. Despite your breach in her original orders, I am sure she will forgive your transgression in favor of gaining such a marvelous ship. Should I be afraid that I don't know if she's being serious or not? He asked himself before replying. That aside, do you know how to pilot a ship? Do the Royal Marines? Cynthia hummed softly. We can if need be. As good as their training is, their focus is to be elite shock troops, infiltrators, and line breakers. Space warfare and piloting are skills that are best served by other dedicated servicemen. Why do you ask? Because the shuttle got wrecked by the hot drop and this station doesn't have a hangar. It was never meant to be found, I think. No shuttles, no fighters, no lifeboats. You're going to have to fly those ships out of here if we plan to go back or take a shuttle if there are any available on these ships, he explained. It was an intense entry, Cynthia agreed. Once I have full access to the ship's systems, I'll know for certain everything about it. About that, I was wondering something. Isn't it strange that this ship doesn't seem to have an AI? He asked. There was one. We managed to isolate and destroy it. Principality Standard Navigational and Communications AI, Cynthia replied nonchalantly. Whoever made this ship didn't bother to install an equally advanced AI to operate basic functions. I doubt we could have contained it as easily otherwise. Thanks for the terrifying thought, he replied with a sigh. Who do you think built these ships? I think either the Imperium or the Qin-Shu Commonality are responsible. They are far more advanced and relatively close to the Principality. Cynthia nodded. I believe the same. Our answers, however, shall be answered soon. The rest of their trip back went in silence, and when they arrived back at the bridge, they found the Royal Marines no longer working at their station and were now maintaining an eerie watch over their prisoners. Wyatt followed Cynthia until she made it to the same console she had been working on before. She placed the box in a compartment beneath the console, and wires extended from her bracers once again, connecting to it. A full minute passed until, suddenly, the lights dimmed to the point they nearly died out, but a few seconds later, they went back to normal. Damn it all, Cynthia cursed weakly through their private channel. Wyatt approached before replying. What's wrong? I have full access to the ship's systems and records, but everything previous to its arrival to Jintrax was completely purged. We don't know where it came from or where it was built. This ship is also different in purpose. According to the information the other team recovered from the smaller black ship, this is a true warship. And it shows, she said, impressed. A true warship? Isn't this a different model of stealth ship? He asked himself before speaking. What about the cruiser class that took part in the battle? No records exist. It is safe to assume every one of these black ships only contains information about itself, and we have to correlate data based on that. It may not give us all the answers, but it will be a start. This destroyer class will be useful to our cause. The frigate class will be dismantled. It is too damaged to be useful to us, and we can't repair it. Whatever secrets the technicians and mechanics can discover from plundering its carcass will be extremely useful, Cynthia replied. Establishing connection with Woodshaft. Established. Wyatt watched in silence as Cynthia killed their private channel to open a new one. He raised an eyebrow when she froze, looked to one side, then the other, then froze again. Half a minute later, she glanced at him for a second or two, then returned her attention to the console. He waited patiently, ready to assist the blue-haired woman in anything for what felt like a short eternity, until her voice broke through the silence, startling him. Wyatt, I require your help, Cynthia began, opening their private channel again. Place your naked hand on this panel. I obey, Wyatt replied, taking off his right gauntlet with a hiss. He placed his hand on the smooth, cool panel. A moment later, he felt something hot against his palm, almost to the point of burning him, but not quite there. It wasn't pleasant, but he managed to withstand it. Several moments later, the heat died out. Now take off your helmet and give this ship a new name. Samuel's glory is no more, she said with a hint of disgust in her voice. Why don't you give it a name yourself? He asked, confused, but sharing her disgust for that awful name. I'm not particularly creative, she replied. What is she playing at? He asked himself, but decided to obey her command regardless. He took off his helmet and hooked it to the maglock on his back. Cynthia pointed to the small microphone that sprouted from above the panel he was touching. What could be a good name for a ship like this? I don't want to name it something pretentious like the honor above all or the unyielding loyalty. I never got the appeal for such names, he thought as he mulled over what a good name could be. He always preferred short, simple names, especially the offensive and dangerous ones. That was one of the reasons he loved Raptor fighters so much. The name reflected what they were and their function. Deadly, simple, effective. Deadly, simple, effective. Deadly, simple, effective, he repeated in his mind, and a moment later he grinned. Who says a name can't have some irony to it? He leaned forth and licked his lips. Navio, he said decidedly. Turning to Cynthia, he couldn't see her expression, but he could feel her unamused, judging eyes on him. With a clank that was felt rather than heard, the clasps were undone. The ship was free to move whenever they wished. Putting on his helmet and gauntlet, he watched as Cynthia disconnected from the console and moved to the captain's chair. "Really, Wyatt?" Wyatt shrugged, glad that he could hide his wide smile.